Hey, it's Dr. Asatar Bear, and in this video, we're going to be talking about other elasticity concepts. All right, so like I said, elasticity is a pretty broad concept, and it deals with the responsiveness of one market or one economic variable to changes in another economic variable. So we have talked about the own price elasticity of demand, and the next step would be to talk about the cross price elasticity of demand. All right, so this is the change in the quantity demanded of one good, let's say good X, relative to the percentage change in the price of now another good. All right, so X refers to good X, and Y refers to some other good Y. All right, so the price change of one good on the quantity change of another good. All right, so we know that goods are related to one another. All right, and from our discussion of demand, we have two relationships that we've singled out to talk about. Okay, so those relationships are substitutes, all right, and complements. So goods can be substitutes for one another, right? And if they're substitutes, here's what we expect to have happen. Okay, so we expect that if goods are substitutes, if this happens, okay, if the price of good Y increases, then the quantity demanded of good X is going to increase, right? Because what's going to happen? People are going to move away from good Y, right? That's the law of demand. But what are they going to do instead? They're going to do good X. They're going to purchase that, all right? Versus if goods are complements, well then, if the price of Y was to increase, then the quantity demanded of X would decrease. If the relationship between the price of good Y and the quantity demanded of good X is direct, right? If they move in the same direction, okay, we've got a plus plus, that substitutes. If we have a plus and a minus on the other hand, then they're complements, all right? So the long and short of this is the sign of the cross price elasticity of demand is important here, okay? Let me show you why, all right? So let's take this first case, okay, in which there's substitutes. So let's say we have this, right? We have a 5% increase in the price of good Y, and we have a, let's say, a, I don't know, let's say it's a 6% increase in the quantity demanded of X. So our cross elasticity of demand in this example, we would have a plus 6% over a plus 5%, all right? So we are going to end up with a positive 1.2 here, all right? Again, if you don't feel comfortable doing this in your head, you just use a calculator, okay? 6 over 5 is 1 1/5, or 1.2, all right? And we noticed that before, when we were dealing with elasticity, it was always negative, but this one's positive, okay? And so the positive sign, the fact that it is greater than 0, okay, positive sign, tells us something, all right? What it means is that goods X and Y are substitutes, okay? Now we're also interested in the size of this, okay, 1.2. So we're gonna interpret that in the same manner that we've interpreted things before, okay? That is, if it's greater than 1, it means it's elastic, okay? Now here, when we're talking about the relationship between goods, whether it's elastic or inelastic, tells us something about the strength of the relationship. Okay, so elastic means, again, it means it's responsive. Okay, and this is what we would call strong substitutes. Okay, so things can be strong, they can have relationships, and those relationships can be either strong or weak. And what we mean by that is when there's something that's strong substitutes, a lot of people make that substitution, or the effect on the overall quantity demanded is again larger than the price change. Okay? If it had gone the other way, let's say that the cross elasticity of demand had been different. Let's say it had been, only a 3% change, still positive, but only 3% versus that same 5% change in the price, increase in the price. Now we would still get a positive result, right? But it's only 0.6, okay? It's still greater than zero. We'd still say there's still substitutes, but the relationship is weaker now, okay? Because the elasticity of demand is less than 1, and we would say it's inelastic, okay? It is unresponsive, or it's on the unresponsive side. And so we'd say these are weak substitutes, all right, rather than strong substitutes, just because the effect is less, all right? So now the other possibility, of course, is that it moves in the opposite direction, all right? So let's say the price of good Y increases by that same 5%. But now the quantity demanded goes down by, let's say, 7%. All right, so same calculation, cross price elasticity of demand. We've got now the negative 7% on top and a positive 5% on the bottom. You don't have to write plus if you don't want to, right? If you write nothing, it's positive. Okay, and then we end up with now a negative 1.4. All right, so because this 1.4 is less than 0, it has a negative sign. That negative sign indicates that goods X and Y are complements, all right? And remember what complements means. It means it goes together, okay? Substitutes, you're going to do one or the other. Complements, the two goods go together. And the interpretation would be the same. Like if we wanted to write a sentence to interpret this, okay, we would say for each 1% increase in the price of good Y, the quantity demanded of good X decreases by 1.4%. All right? That would be our, verbal statement that if we wanted to state it in a sentence rather than in a mathematical expression. Okay, so cross-price elasticity of demand, that's our concept here. Okay, next up, we're going to look at what's called the income elasticity of demand. All right, and as you might expect, that is the relationship between the percentage change in the quantity demanded relative to the percentage change in income. All right, so we'll use the term Y to stand for income. Now, for most goods, what our expectation is, what we expect to see, so for most goods, what we expect to see is that as income Y increases, we expect that the quantity demanded of that good is also going to increase. So probably most of the time, there's going to be a direct relationship between these two things. All right? Direct relationship, which is going to give us a positive sign. So if that's the case, all right, let's say, for example, okay, the increase in income is 10%, and the change in the quantity demanded is, let's say, 0.7%. We would do our calculation, okay, income elasticity of demand, on top we would have the 0.7% positive, and on the bottom we would have our 10%. And so 0.7 divided by 10 gives us 0.07. And this tells us a couple of things, okay? So first of all, it's greater than 0, all right? And this tells us this is like most goods, all right? When something has a positive sign like this, we just call it a normal good. Because, again, that is like most things are like this, that's kind of the default position, okay? So greater than 0 tells us it's a normal good. It also tells us that it's fairly unresponsive to changes in income, okay? So, and we know that because the elasticity of demand is less than 1, okay? So, and this one is pretty close to 0, right? This is pretty inelastic, about as inelastic as you're likely to see. So what would be like that? What would be an example of a good that is fairly inelastic with respect to income? Well, it'd probably be something like salt, right? Salt is a low-priced commodity that is, first of all, in pretty much every kind of food, and secondly, it's so low cost that pretty much you can afford to consume the amount of salt that you'd like. You know, if you have a big increase in your income, are you going to have a big change in your salt consumption? Probably it's not going to be all that big. Maybe you'll eat more food. Maybe you'll throw more parties or something, right? But you know, the change in your consumption is likely to be pretty minimal. All right, so that would be inelastic, income inelastic, but it's a normal good. All right, now for some goods, the relationship is the opposite of what we've described, okay? That is, as the income Y increases, the quantity demanded of that good actually decreases. This has an inverse relationship. It's going to have a negative sign, all right? And this we would call an inferior good, right? Inferior good. So, example, let's say that, again, our income elasticity of demand, let's say it looks like this, okay? We have a 10% increase in the income, and then we have a decrease in, let's say we have a 15% decrease in the quantity demanded of the good. Okay, so two things are going on here. First off, it's negative, okay? So we end up with a negative 1.5 here, all right? And the fact that the sign is less than 0 tells us, again, the good is inferior, okay? And secondly, we want to look at the magnitude, okay? We want to look at the absolute value of it is now greater than 1, all right? Absolute value, this is greater than 1. It's negative 1.5. We're not going to drop the sign, but if we were to, right, if we just looked at the size of it, forget about the sign for the moment, we would see it's greater than 1. And this tells us that it's fairly responsive, in other words, elastic. So it's responsive, but in a negative direction, okay? So if it had been 0.5 but negative, well, now the elasticity of demand would be less than 1, and we would say it's inelastic or unresponsive to income changes, all right? So the size matters, right? We're still looking at it relative to 1, okay? Less than 1, it's inelastic. Greater than 1, it's elastic. And we also care about the sign, because the sign tells us the direction. That tells us, are we talking about a normal good, which most goods are, or are we talking about an inferior good, something which decreases as you get more income? Okay, now what kinds of things are like that? Well, bus tickets, for example. All right. Why is that? If you get more income, do you travel more on the bus? Maybe up to a point. But at some point, you're going to reduce your bus ticket purchases and choose some other method of travel, right? So there are examples of this, inferior goods. Here's one that surprised me: flour. Flour is an inferior good. So you get more money and you buy less flour. And the reason for that is that flour is an intermediate good. You don't consume flour. That's not the end product. You don't sit down on the couch with a bag of flour and eat it. You make it into things. And as you get more income, you might choose to just buy the things that flour is made into rather than buying the flour. All right. So normal goods, inferior goods. What determines whether a good is normal or inferior? Because people differ, right? We're looking at how does the market respond to these changes, not how individuals respond, because individuals can do all kinds of things, but we're interested in what's the overall effect, right? Some people might well get more money and buy more bus tickets. That's fine, right? What we care about is what happens overall. So our final concept for elasticity here is the elasticity of supply. Okay, elasticity of supply. We'll use that same symbol but put an S as the subscript. So now we have the percentage change in the quantity supplied over the percentage change in the price. And what we expect is going to happen here is we expect to see a direct relationship because that's the law of supply, right? As the price increases, the quantity supplied also increases. So we expect that the elasticity of supply is going to be positive, right? And what we're just interested in is what is the exact nature of the relationship? How much is the increase? Okay, so let's do an example. We'll say that the percentage change in the quantity supplied is, or let's say that the price change is 10% and the percentage change in the quantity supplied is 20%. We're going to get a 20% over 10%. This gives us a positive 2, right? Now again, elasticity doesn't have any units. It has percentage on the top, percentage on the bottom. The units drop out. So elasticity is always just a number. It's shorn of its units, okay? So 2, and what does this mean? Well, we're still going to interpret it relative to the number 1, all right? So this means because the elasticity of supply is greater than 1, we call it elastic, all right? The suppliers are responsive to price changes, okay? The price changes 10%, the quantity supplied changes 20%. It's larger, right? That's all we're saying. It's larger, okay? So if, on the other hand, it had been smaller, okay, let's say that same 10% increase in the price, these suppliers, they do respond, but less so. Okay, now we would get a positive 0.5. The elasticity of supply would be less than 1, and we'd call it inelastic. Okay, so relatively unresponsive to that price change. All right. Now, there are many, many more elasticity concepts, many more elasticities. So, very, very common thing to use. Anytime you're looking at one variable relative to another variable, economists are going to calculate some kind of elasticity out of it. So these are just a couple of examples of what we're interested in and how we're approaching it, right? We're interested, what direction do things move in? How much do they move? Just as a way of trying to measure our cause and effect relationships as much as possible. Keep in mind that all this stuff relies on that key assumption, which is ceteris paribus, right? Remember, what that means is we are holding everything else constant, okay? That might not be a very realistic assumption in a universe which is in flux. We know that many, many things are changing at any given moment. it's actually pretty unrealistic to assume that only one thing changes, but we do that for analytical purposes. All right. Okay, that's my coverage of this three concepts. We have now four total elasticity concepts. Okay, so the first one we did, the own price elasticity of demand. Okay, the second one we did, the cross price elasticity of demand. The third one that we did, the income elasticity of demand. And then finally, the price elasticity of supply. All right. Like I said, there's many more, but this it just gives you an idea to bring the concepts together. So how do we know if goods are substitutes or complements? Well, we use the cross price elasticity of demand. How do we know if goods are normal or inferior? We're going to use the income elasticity of demand and so forth. All right, that's my presentation. Thank you very much.